Hey everyone, it's me, Simon Wesley. Yeah. Oh. Hello everyone, it's me, Simon Wesley again. And yeah, today we're going to be going through, or we're going to be continuing on Witch on the Holy Night. And and after I discovered a few things about my computer, like as I've mentioned during the Doom stream last Friday, I can now actually have my AC on. I can actually have the AC unit in this room on while streaming because my PC now actually, my mic now just filters that out. You might be able to hear it a bit while I'm talking, but you won't be hearing it. You won't be hearing it like when I'm quiet or doing something. But anyway, yeah, let's get back to it. Next episode. Once, long ago, I saw a beautiful bird fly overhead. Round and round, it circled the distant blue sky. How high it flew in this air when humans, not birds, reigned supreme. And yet the bird was completely uninterested in humanity's endless desire for expansion, or creation of even higher homes, or the smoke bellowing from industry's chimneys. The sky extends further than the eye can see. It belongs to no one, not now, not then. The bird was a truly noble creature, flapping its wings powerfully across the wild, ancient sky. Until the sudden sound of cold iron. A wing is shot, its symmetry gone forever. Cruel and tragic, its body plummets downward. Not knowing its fate, the bird frantically beats its wings till the very end. One moment soaring with eyes to the sky, the next crashing down to the dry, hardened earth. This was the dream I saw. No matter how much I thought about it, its details remained clouded. What did that bird look like, for instance?
Hi, 今日の授業はここまで。試験範囲の総まとめなんかやっちゃいましたけど、
Oh, hey, it's been a while
これ
since we've seen
うちのクラスだ
since
け
we
ですから、
last saw this guy.
よそのクラスには内密にお願いしますね。担任特権と思ってください。ほら、原告の平均点ぐらいは学年一番にしておくと、皆さんも鼻が高いと思いまして。
Mr. Yamasiro chuckled as he finished. This was typical of the kind teacher responsible for Year 2 Class C, master at relaxing his pupils.
口元に本音出てる。鼻を高くしたいのは私たちじゃないですよね。
鼻っていうかメンツですよね。先生、里中先生に嫌味言われてばっかりだし。
つうかはっきり言えばいいんすよ。お前ら頭悪すぎだって。いやまあうちのクラス見事なまでに体育会系ばっかりだけどさ。
いえいえ、テストの点数だけが学生生活ではありませんから、僕から言うべきことは何も。
Yeah, it's about suffering.
先生方もそこまで目くじら立ててるわけじゃないので、別にクラス全員が赤点でも僕の人生には何ら関わりはないんですけどね。しかし一方では一人厄介な御仁がおりまして、皆さんが選んだ全校生徒代表の方なんですが、これが恐ろしいのなんの。テストの点数が低いのは生徒ではなく教育する側が無能だからです。 教育委員会への報告準備はいつでもできていますので、と日夜脅してくるんですよ。それでも生徒たちが治らないようなら、その時は直接私が監督します。とか、生徒としてどうなんですかね、あれ。
The warm atmosphere in the room suddenly fell below freezing. The students of Class C now knew who their true enemy was.
ああ、そっか。山城先生生徒会の顧問だったっけ。ナムナム。
さすがは応援団を立ち直らせた女傑。教師一人退職に追い込むなど造作もねえ。やっぱりな、会長絶対年サバ読んでるって。あの迫力、同年代と思えねえし。ほら、うちの女子と比べると特にこう。
木の実だけでも A 組に引き取ってもらえませんか？そりゃ男子はみんな猿ですけど、
What the?
こいつだけレベルの違う
What
猿
my
です
face
よ
do that?
絶対。
Why'd my face do that? I just pinched the bridge of my nose and my face went crazy.
あれでも女子 A 組だけどあんまり成績良くねえよな。中の上ぐらいじゃなかったっけ。
そうだけど別にいいんじゃない。塾も行ってないし、生徒会仕切ってたまにバイトまでしてるんだから。あれで学年トップだったら逆に気持ち悪すぎ
だよな。首位は副会長に任せとけばいいんだよ。
まあまあ皆さん、噂話はそのあたりで。地獄耳と。じゃあそれなりに復習をよろしく。あんまり点数が悪いと冬休み。あ、それとしずきくん。
Mr. Yamashiro gathered his things and beckoned for Sojiro to join him in the hallway. There were no other students to be seen despite it being break time between classes. Voices were audible in the distance, but the hall itself felt strangely quiet and calm. Perhaps it was due to the sense of confinement created by the lack of windows. Usually students spent their breaks either in their classrooms or on the veranda.
何ですか、山城先生。
いえ、そう大した用事じゃないんですけどね。試験前にこんな話をするのもデリカシーがないんですが、気になったので。どうだろう、学校には慣れたかな。
Well, alright is one way of putting it. Though this level of concern from a teacher startled him, Sojiro felt reassured. It was only natural, after having had to deal with such difficult personalities lately. Mr. Yamasiro's trivial questions were refreshing.
はい、学校の作りや。
そっか、それはよかった。うちのクラスは口の悪い面々だけど、その分気を使わなくていいからね。しずきくんと相性が良くて助かったよ。
Sojiro's eyes shone brightly in appreciation. In Aoko's words, Mr. Yamashiro was a brutish, forgettable, downright detestable man who did not even deserve the title of teacher. And Sojiro found him considerate in his own way.
アルバイトもほどほどにね。試験前だって言えば、大抵のところは休ませてくれるから、あまり無理はしないように。また試験で困ったことがあったら周りに相談しなさい。一人で悩んでいても時間の無駄だよ。ほら、学校っていうのは話し相手にだけは困らないから。
With a wave of his hand, Mr. Yamashiro was gone. Pure-hearted Sojiro gave him a solemn nod as if to say he accepted the advice of his so-called forgettable teacher and went back into the classroom. And then
女のことで相談だ。
Sojiro had not wasted a moment in putting Sojiro had not wasted a moment in putting Mr. Yamasiro's advice into practice.
そうらしい。難問にぶち当たっているんだ。深く考えてみて気づいたんだが、どうも自分は発想が貧困らしい。
Zotro averted his eyes out of shame over his lack of
いや
insight.
豊かだと思ってたことがびっくりなんだけど。まあいい、こっち来い。
Very often when a guy says he's a ladies' man, very often when a guy says he's a ladies' man or something to that effect, that guy has no idea how to talk to women. Shocked as he was, Kinomi grabbed Zotro by the shoulder and pulled him over to the wall. Kinomi had nearly burst out laughing when Zotro, with a straight face, had admitted his difficulty with girls, but he realized it was the first time Zotro had ever turned to him for advice. Zotro was always able to break down any task as a part-time job into bite-sized pieces, but he was clearly struggling with a different problem now. This was going to take some serious effort.
なんかやっちまったのかい？いや。
これからやるのかもしれない。木の実、例えばの話、マッドベアにハリセンボンみたいな女の子が入ってきたとする。その子は俺が嫌いで、マッドベアから出て行ってほしいようなんだけど、俺はマッドベアを辞めるわけにはいかない。
Zotro explained that he couldn't just quit his part-time job at the restaurant, he needed the money. Kinomi grunted a few more times to indicate he was still following Zotro's story.
つまりその女を追い出したいと。
逆だ。なんとか認めてもらいたい。隠していたけど、俺はその女の子が嫌いというわけじゃなくて。
Zotro furrowed his brow. Kinomi could not help but laugh at his friend's lack of manliness all in his answer. Girls were the one area where Hosuke's skills and experiences were triple those of Zotro. Well, I hope everyone's aware that 3 times 0 is still 0.
なんだよ。要はナンパだよ。むしろ仲良くなりたいってわけ？
Zotro wasn't sure how to respond. He nodded slowly without really understanding the implication of what Kinomi had said.
けど、どうすればいいのかわからない。そもそもどうやって同い年の女の子と仲良く話ができるんだ。
クラスの女どもとは話してんじゃん。あれでいいんだっつの。俺は持ち前の天然系で押してけばいいべ。山育ちってのは希少なアイデンティティだと思うぜ。珍しい。
そうかな。珍しいというのはあんまりいいことじゃない気がする。だいたいそもそも嫌われている場合はどうすればいいんだ？クラスのみんなは親切だけど、相手はハリセンボンだ。いや、この際ハリネズミでもいい。
そういう場合はめげなきゃいいんだよ。相手が折れるのを待つって寸法だな。トゲだけに。
Zotro's brows sunk deeper still.
この例え話はダメだ。
None of this is going to help it. None of this is gonna help him. None of this advice is going to help him make Alice like him. Or, well, I guess tolerate. I guess tolerate is a better term. You needed more concrete material to work with.
ばっか。女なんてのは機嫌を取ってればいいんだよ。まずは女の趣味とか大事にしてるもんとか聞いて、そこをフォローすればいい。自分の都合より相手の都合だ。まずは外堀から攻めろってことだな。
外堀？外回りか。
もち。その後はまあ結局これが一番効果的なんだけどな。袖の下ってやつ？プレゼントで釣れ。そん時の需要と供給さえ合えば嫌われてても受け取ってもらえる。受け取らせちまえばあとはそれが義理になるってもんだ。
That's kind of sleazy. Okay, that sounds kind of sleazy. But then again, it does kind of. I mean, it does kind of match someone who doesn't have a lot of scruples regarding this sort of thing. Kinomi then proclaimed with an odd sense of pride that his approach had resulted in only failure for him. That this approach had resulted in only failure.
けど問題がある。 確かにご飯とかそういうのをおごってもらうと嬉しいけど。
そんな金はないってんだろ。分かってる分かってる。仕方ないね。そういうしずきくんのために一丁割のいいバイトを紹介してやろうじゃねえのよ。
An easy way to get you some cold hard dough. Drugs? Sorry about that. They slid from the side of the classroom deeper to one corner, to in front of one of the lockers where no one ever stayed for long. It would be days before Sojiro realized the suggestion he was receiving was of the illegitimate kind, the kind he should not have shared with anyone. Listen, Sojiro, have you ever considered tax evasion? That night, dinner at the mansion was a feast of bread. Soft slices lay stacked in the center of the table, surrounded by variously colored jams. In a bowl was salad, mainly lettuce, with a small plate of unevenly cut ham. Sojiro may have had no frame of reference for what an average family dinner should be, but he could tell that this was most certainly not normal. Yeah, no. Salad, jams, bread, and some deli ham. Well, I don't know. When I was younger, it wasn't uncommon for my family to have spaghetti. I still like spaghetti. Now I add like I like adding I like to add mushrooms and onion to mine. In truth, it was a first-rate case of laziness.
チョコのペースト切れたままじゃん。
Chocolate.
アリス、新しいの買っておいてって言わなかった？
今日は一日部屋にこもっていたから。第一、チョコレートを食べるのはあなただけよ。自分のものは自分で調達をするべきね。
Okay, fair enough. If you're the only one who buys it, then okay, that's a fair. That I will say that is a fair point. But then again, if someone asks you to buy it, you should. If you don't want to grab it, then just say no. Just say you're the only one that eats it. Go grab it yourself. For these two girls, however, this dinner seemed to be completely normal. They had a system of regularly taking turns being in charge of meals, and tonight was Alice's turn. Normally, she would spend as little time as possible, only truly applying herself when there was something to celebrate. Of course, Sojiro was none the wiser to Alice's unique approach to food preparation. For him, it was a plain lackluster meal, and when it came to dinner, not saying anything to each other was another staple of their meals. The sounds of cutlery, the scraping of chairs, and the tick-tock of the clock were the only things to be heard in the sunroom. Sojiro himself had already eaten. At this moment, he was watching the goings-on from the drawing room.
Sojiro, 9時からアルバイトでしょ？行ってらっしゃい。私たちのことは気にしないでいいから。
ああ、じゃあ行ってくる。
Man, dude's working his head off. Sojiro donned his coat with a goodbye nod. Sojiro glanced again at the sunroom. He momentarily locked eyes with Alice, or so he imagined. She had been ignoring him all day, and not just refusing to talk to him, she had avoided him so much so as to not look at him all day until this very moment. He could understand if he was annoying her as the outsider of the mansion, but he felt no animosity in her gaze just now.
今の様子を見てたのかな。
Sojiro looked nervously at his surroundings for a moment before heading to the foyer. Alice only let her gaze return to normal when she was completely sure he was gone.
ああ、めんどくさ。
Alco was appalled by Alice's brazen display. So much so, her immaculate veneer of apathy crumbled.
何献立に不満でもあるの青子。
もちろんあるけど、いつものことだし慣れてるわよ。私が呆れてるのは、あんたの意地の悪さの方。徹底的に無視してるくせに、相手の反応を伺ってるなんてめめしくない？罠張って待ち受けるようなもんじゃない。
彼の反応なんて探ってないわ。そもそも興味がないもの。それと、今のは差別発言ね。めめし、今の場合なら、あなたは矛盾している、と言ってちょうだい。
Hang on, is this... Okay, that line just seems a little awkward. Okay, yeah, that line just seems a little awkward. But, I wonder what it said in Japanese. So, wait. Also, that's not even how you use hypocrite. Ah.
うわ、自覚ありときた。
Choosing not to rise through her mate's jibe. What? Alco tore off pieces of bread and ate them one by one, anger still visible on her face.
じゃあここからは青崎青子としてじゃなく共犯者としての質問ね。アリス的に彼を見逃していいと思える判断材料はない？ありえないけど実は彼も魔術師でしたなんてオチであったとしてもここに住まわせるのは容認できない？
その理由なら認めるわ。彼を許すのではなく、そんなことに気づかなかった私たちへのペナルティとして。そうね。今のは絶対にありえない話だけど、彼がここに住む選択を飲む場合すらあるかもしれない。気の迷いは私にだってあるのだし。
I think... Okay, I like this game, but I have noticed a few grammatical errors and a few translation issues that I hope they fix. Like the line about Sissy being sexist, that just seems a little out of place. That just seems a little out of place. I don't think Alice would really care about that sort of thing. And then, like, here, we can burn that... Okay, I don't know if that's actually I don't know if this is them actually being... about her, Okay, maybe this is actually getting the mood across and I'm reading too much into it. But it does seem a little awkward, especially when the normal saying is cross that bridge when we come to it.
そういうことよ。今は私との義理とかプライドで冷静を保ってるあんただけど、あいつの努力次第で少しは。
それは諦めて。あなたも知っていると思うけど。
Alice had never been the type to let her guard down around others. The young witch despised humans, having recreated so many of their objects in fairy tales.
そんなのはあんた個人のトラウマでしょ。自分の意固地さを魔女の血統云々で棚上げするのはそれこそめめしいわ。いいじゃない。嫌いなら嫌いで。 私が気に食わないのはね、あんたのどっちつかずの態度よ、アリス。
Oh, wait, they could have just translated that as being a coward. Like yet another example of you being cowardly. Honestly, that would probably work better.
どっちつかずの態
そう。無視するなら徹底して無視してやれって言ってるの。ガチガチに守りを固めて、そのくせ城門だけ開けて、獲物が油断して入ってきたら串刺しにする気満々とか、相棒として見てられないわ。あいつにできることなんて、閉ざされた門を開けることぐらいだっていうのに、その機会さえなくすのはどうなの？
Okay, yeah, I have to I have to agree. I have to agree. If you don't like him, just be direct about it. Don't act, or don't pretend you're ignoring him, but keep constantly watching him. Just actually do it.
ごめんなさい、青子。もう少し簡単に言って。その例えは、ちょっと。
Alice seemed unable to grasp Alco's metaphor. Meanwhile, Alco had had it up to here with her roommates lacking self-awareness and was starting to lose her cool.
だから、興味ないとか言っておきながら粉かけるなってこと。あんなにチラチラ盗み見たら、あいつ変に勘違いしちゃうかもしれないでしょ。アリスはああ見えて、本当は自分と仲直りしたがっているに違いない。じゃあ早速部屋に押しかけてみよう。とか。
Alco can be mean, but I do appreciate her being very upfront, direct with people. Honestly, just being upfront is, she can be mean, but I appreciate someone being upfront with it rather than trying to beat around the bush.
なるの？
なる。少なくとも私だったらいい加減イライラして、話があるなら校舎裏まで来い。決着つけかねないレベル。この毒。
そうだったのね。別に彼と話をする気はないんだし、私も彼を見ていたというより、彼の手足を見ていたのだし。
手足ってなんで？
手足は手足よ。彼個人には思うところはないけど、それが少しだけ気になってつい視線で追っていたの。
あの夜って遊園地のこと？なんかしたっけあいつ。
Alice's expression soured. She still felt the sting of
飛
her
んだで
defeat.
しょ彼。レールの上から私のダンプティに向かって。
ええ、そんなこと言ってたわね。勢いでつい1メートルぐらいだから飛んじゃったとか。
Alco had not actually seen it in person, luckily. All she knew was that the spell she had placed on Sotro was part of the reason he survived that jump to death. Elsa, on the other hand, had observed the whole scene from the clock tower. It had only lasted an instant, but it had burned itself into her mind's eye. More than when her precious moon had fallen in Alco's hands, and Flat Snark had come tumbling down.
でも、それがどうしたの？卵の敵討ちってわけ？
ダンプティは壊れるのが仕事だから、敵討ちも何もないわ。ただ、人間の体ってあんな風に動くんだなって。
As it goes, for someone with as little human interaction as Alice, Sochiro's leap must have appeared quite remarkable, particularly because his legs were orders of magnitude less capable than those of an animal at worst. And yet, even with such feeble legs, with those meek arms of his, he managed to fly through the open air like a bird. To her, it was akin to the feeling city folk get when they see a wild creature in its natural habitat.
気にしないで。機会があるならもう一度見たいと思っただけ。別に彼に何を期待しているわけじゃないわ。
なるほど。アリスのプロイって大体が人型じゃないしね。 単に物珍しさで見ていただけか。
Alco sighed and released the tension from her shoulders. She was disappointed to discover that Alice's behavior stemmed from simple curiosity, like that of a child with a new toy. And Alice was in no position to take issue with her reaction. And how could she? She was not entirely sure what it was that she herself was feeling.
夕食、明日は私が作るから。試験前だってのに、こんなしょぼくれたもん食べさせられたら、一夜漬けする気合も湧かないわよ。
ご自由に。私も手が空いて助かるわ。
I really doubt that it took you more than like... I really doubt that it took you more than like 10 minutes to prepare that. Because it takes... Okay, setting out the bread, probably pre-cut sliced bread. Chopping a bunch of salad, tossing it into a bowl with maybe like some carrots or with some carrots and croutons. And then just spreading out jams that might take like 10 to 15 minutes to set up completely. So yeah, you lost 10 to 15 minutes of your free time. Night came and went in the mansion. For better or worse, the disturbances caused by the foreign invader had not yet caused the kettle to boil over. The next morning at 6:30, as sunlight spread out across the sky, Sotro walked to school with Alco in the chilly morning air.
いい？洋館にいるときは、極力一人にならないこと。
It was her intention to keep Sotro safe until he left the mansion. Nonetheless...
眠い。6時から登校とか、あんたも働き者ね。
そうでもないよ。30分仕出しを手伝うだけだし。
His work ethic was a little too strong for a student entering finals.
それより青崎、無理してないか？別にこっちに付き合うことないんだぞ。
ご心配なく、生徒会室で仮眠取るから。約束だし、門までは一緒に行くわよ。
But internally, Alco was worried. What traps did her roommate have in store for him? She could not imagine Alice had planned anything to go down the woods, but she wanted to be safer than sorry. The least she could do was accompany Sotro to school. That much she was firmly committed to. Any traps that presented themselves could then be dealt with on the spot. Well, not dealt with so much as destroyed, since that was Alco's forte, but that would be enough to keep him safe for the time being.
帰り道に関しては、アリスもそこまで暇ではないと信じるしかないんだけど。
If Alice was willing to put all her energy into a new trap after the first had failed, then they were as good as dead anyway. But Alco would cross that road when she came to it. It all depended on how deep Alice's dislike of Sotro really went. It would have to be enough to make her abandon her pride as a witch, something she had protected fervently until now. If that were the case, Alco knew she would never be able to keep him safe. The moment 24/7 protection became necessary was the moment she had failed. Her character led her to focus on what she could do in the here and now and ignore the rest. In this current plan of hers was her best attempt at doing right by everyone. They left behind the Kuonji estate, and the two remained together until the residential area at the bottom of the hill, where Alco glanced casually at
ところで、
Sotro.
何か考えてる？
Surprisingly, Sotro saw through her harmless question and sensed the bigger issue. How was he going to win Alice over? In fact, he had been thinking about that very question. According to his friend, there were 3 basic approaches he could take. One was the roundabout approach.
こいつは時間がかかるが最も自然だ。人間ってのは自分が好きなものを大切にされるとコロッと気を許しちまう。仲間意識ってやつだな。
In other words, instead of focusing on the person one wishes to win over, one should focus on their interests. It was a surprisingly mature opinion coming from Kinomi. Unfortunately, Sotra had no idea what sort of things Alice liked. Sorry, my nose is itching a bit. I don't know why. Maybe I'm coming down with something. She seemed very fond of the mansion, but what can you do? Clean it for her? He sensed that would have a reverse effect. He had the distinct feeling she would not want him touching what was precious to her. The second approach was to take the inner track.
でもやっぱり本人を落とすのが一番早い。俺たちに魅力がないのなら、魅力のある外付け装備に頼るのだ。
Just bribe him, poor head.
そう。プレゼントなんだよ、しずきくん。
A quick and dirty strategy, the assassin's strike, manipulate someone's feelings with an expensive gift. To Sotro, this sounded like his best chance. The approach was easy for him to grasp, and he appreciated simplicity. However, he had the same concerns as with the first approach. A step was missing. Without this step, the plan was bound to fail.
あとは、まあ、ケンってやつ？俺にはよくわかんないけどさ、やりすぎると悪い印象を持たれるとか殿下が言ってたな。私、今落とされてる？って意識させちゃダメなんだよ。付き合った後で、あれ？私落とされた？と気づかせるのが上等なんだとか。
Though Sojiro did not quite grasp the details, he understood the basic idea. Don't press your luck. He knew that much was good advice. He would have to try extremely hard to get on Alice's good side, and he could tell it would be a long process to get there. Sojiro recalled the times he had wandered inside of the fox's territory in the mountains. He had left some food on the ground for the fox, and then it never bothered him again. What is considered goodwill and kindness differs from person to person. But if there's enough goodwill from one side, regardless of whether that goodwill is reciprocated, the other side will eventually start to feel an obligation to do so. That was key.
大丈夫。考えてるよ。とりあえず自分にできることとか、したいことをしようと思う。安心してくれ。青崎に忠告されたことすらきちんと守る方針だ。
Sorry, I'm grabbing a little bit of pear bread. Stuff's good. Ah. Okay. Yeah, pear bread's good. Keeps for a while, and pretty tasty too. Sojiro seemed ready to face things head on. His answer did little to reassure Aoko, however. She found herself more concerned about his safety than ever before.
"そうなんだ。できれば安く買えるところ。
しずきの家、アパートよね。ほうきなんてもの必要とは思えないけど。
いや、ちょっと気になるところがあって掃除がしたいんだ。ゴミ袋。
無駄な出費はできないって言ってたくせに。まあどうでもいい。
多分一日じゃ終わらないから自分で買うよ。元から欲しかったものだし、あると便利だよ、ほうき。
Sojiro was on his way home from his part-time job after school. It was 4 in the afternoon. Hours earlier than his part-time job would have normally ended. The Mad Bear's head chef had gotten in trouble with the accountant for making a student work the day before exams, thus Sojiro's boss had tearfully sent him home early. And that is when it happened. The interruption to his standard schedule must have been just the shocking thing. Normally, he would meet up with Alko after she was done with student council affairs and go home with her. However, today Sojiro was asking the other students who worked at the same place if they knew any shops in the area where he could buy a fur.
田舎者の趣味って理解不能ね。推強すぎ。うちの近くにまっずいラーメン屋あるでしょ。あそこの通りを終わりまで行けば、起きたって金物店がある。
People from the countryside are like so weird. Honestly, I'd argue city folk are a lot weirder.
一式揃えるなら西口のホームセンターより安く上がるわ。どうでもいいけど、私の茶。
Sojiro's eyes lit up as if he had met his savior, but biking uphill to the mansion, let alone with package carrier, was not a pretty thought.
いや、自転車には乗ってみたいけど、今回は遠慮するよ。
Saying farewell to his co-workers, he headed to the hardware store. He needed a cheap and sturdy bamboo broom and a large dustpan to go with it. If possible, a pushcart and stick for a splint would have been nice too. As it happened, Sojiro wanted quite a few things. Is he going to give Alice a broom and she's going to get mad that he got her a stereotypical... Alice returned to her work after waking from her nap. The Kuonji estate had an annex that housed a library. The library was filled with books handed down to her from her mother, so it was Alice's territory such that even Alko dared not enter. If the mansion was a witch's abode, left behind by the times, the library was a fairy tale of hoarders lost to the ages. It was a natural sanctuary for the young witch who could command employees to do her bidding. She relied on her memory to recall the location of each book on the many shelves, and then she saw it. Upon raising her head, she was met with the most unusual of signs. Or of sights? Yeah. Her elegant eyebrows bristled in distaste. From that moment on, she failed to accomplish anything she had planned for that day. She was instead forced to stare at the strange sight outside her window, eyebrows fixed to that position until the sun set. Oh well. Moving into the grand mansion on the hill had not brought any major changes to Sojiro's day-to-day schedule. He woke up, went to his part-time job, ate breakfast, and went to school. Classes came and went, still strange and new, broken up by rare and brief moments of rest until the school day ended. He left school, went to his part-time job, slept, woke up, and studied for exams. A modest life for a modest young man, continuing every day in the same fashion despite his best efforts to change his fortune. But nothing ever really changes, whether Alko was by his side in the mansion, as was frequently the case, or whether Alice was making him drink some potion she prepared before going to bed. The former was an attempt by Alko to make him feel better, the latter was some attempt to keep him safe even if he did not fully appreciate it. Then, one day, a day like any other, while Sojiro was pouring himself some tea as he worried over the lack of change in his life. His relationship with Alice was the same as ever, but there was one major change this morning. He was drinking black tea instead of green. Though there were all sorts of different types of tea to be found in the kitchen, a newcomer to the world of tea like Sojiro could not tell one of them from the other, or one of them from the next. Naturally, his tea-making skills were limited to tea bags, one of which he placed in his cup before returning to the dining table. Alice and Alko were already seated. The two were eating in silence. In this household, it was everyone for themselves when it came to breakfast. A diplomatic description of their breakfasts would be simple. A more accurate description would be 2 slices of stale bread prepared in seconds. Alko exchanged a word or two with Alice, took a sip of tea, and stood up from her seat. Since it was winter break for the high schooler Alice, she returned to her room after eating as she normally did, while Alco headed to the front door, shoes in hand, ready for school. After hurriedly clearing the table, Sojiro rushed out the door after Alco. Together, they walked down the long hill in the direction of school. They had spent 3 days following this very simple routine.
ところで、あれから動きはあった?
School had ended, and evening had arrived. Buttered bread roll in one hand, Alice replied with a simple, silent shake of her head.
そう。ならあっちも次の手を考えているんでしょうね。魔術師本体の居場所は見当ついてる?
Her response was exactly the same. Without showing the slightest bit of dejection, she continued to chew the roll and took a stab at her salad.
そう。私も試験が終わったら手伝うから、それまで悪いけど一人でやってて。今日からあのバカを一夜漬けにしなくちゃいけないんで、余裕ないの。
Alice's face grew dour, as if she had something to get off her chest.
問題ないでしょ? アリスはもう休みに入ってるんだから、一日全部使えるじゃない。
Alice was indeed on vacation and could spend all day every day on her work as a mage. Yet she had spent the past few days holed up at the library instead. She was hardly devoting herself to dealing with the challenger, as Alco put it.
アリス? 聞いてる?
わかってる。今夜からそっちもやるから。
Sighing, she stood up. What was bothering Alice, and what was bothering Alice, and what was it she wanted to say? What had she been doing only 2 hours earlier? The young witch took her leave from the breakfast table without offering a single clue. Misaki High was a private school, and as such, its winter break started earlier than public schools. The end of term ceremony was in mid-December, followed by a brief respite before the next term began. Of course, that was if and only if they overcame the classic obstacle lying between them and an extended break from school. Final exams. The radio continued its broadcast late into the night. A thermos of hot tea eliminated the need to venture down to the kitchen. An electric blanket kept away the winter cold, and a crab-shaped pastry staved off any dinner-time hunger. These were the lengths Alco had gone to. She needed to ensure that every aspect of her surroundings helped her pull a successful all-nighter.
期末試験1日目、ご苦労様。それで、生まれ変わる覚悟できた?
Sojiro nodded earnestly. Man, I never had to pull an all-nighter for something in high school, but in undergrad I had to stay up for like I stayed up for at least the longest I stayed up in undergrad was at least 36 hours. I think maybe 2 days straight. 36 to 48 hours. Yeah, I don't like that. I like sleeping. I very much enjoy sleeping. Besides, all-nighters are terrible for your health and for your study habits, or for actually retaining any information. Upon returning from work, he encountered not the mage he expected, but the demon student council president Aozaki. Half a day earlier, the first day of exams were over, and Sojiro was about to head back to the mansion, where he hoped to put his plan into practice.
今夜、私の部屋で監禁ね。あ、夕方からのアルバイトは当然キャンセル。ちょっと本気であの点数はありえないから。
A cold blue grin greeted him in the hallway. Clenched in her fist was Sojiro's exam paper. Mr. Yamashiro had no doubt said.
転校してきたばかりだし、しょうがないよね。
But she had snatched the exam out of the teacher's hands the minute he tried to show her. That was how Sojiro ended up in Naoko's room instead of the room in the attic to which he was accustomed. Though her situation was far from normal, at the end of the day she was an adolescent girl like any other. Naturally, she felt uncomfortable letting a boy her own age into her room. However, his grades were truly something they called desperate measures. That explained why her mood was even worse than normal today. The vein on her forehead was pulsing visibly with anger.
先に自分の復習済ませる。あんたはそのテーブル使ってて。
Desperate measures. Okay. That reminds me, at some point I'm going... at some point I'm going to stream the Halo games. Why Desperate Measures reminded me of Halo? Well, there's a track in Halo ODST that's... I don't think it's its official name, but it's just commonly referred to We're the Desperate Measures. That game's good. ODST is a great game. I wish there were more ODSTs and fewer Spartan 4s. But back on topic. Aoko turned her back to him and sat down at her favorite desk. Sojiro was left standing before a cheap-looking glass table.
なんかいろいろと慣れないな。なあ、青崎。この青いのなんだ?
Hey, guitar. Restless, Sojiro found his eyes drawn to the guitar propped up in the corner.
なんか薄いし青いし、とんがってるし。きっと青崎のことだし。もしかしなくても、武器。
I guess so. I guess I could get how someone who's never seen it before might interpret it as that.
楽器よそれ。エレキはともかく、アコギは音楽室で似たようなのあったでしょ。あとこれ以上青々言ったら、そのとんがってるので殴るからね。
My dad's got a few guitars that he's really good at playing. I know for he's been playing for most of his life at this point, and he's gotten very good at it. He really likes picking along to blues song. He really likes playing blues songs and classic rock too. I've heard him play. I've heard him perfectly play "Eruption" by Van Halen, and also I played a track for Persona 4 for him, and he grabbed a guitar and immediately started picking along to it perfectly. Okay. Sojiro plopped himself down onto a cushion, struggling to suppress the desire to retort that it was a weapon after all.
ちょっと落ち着きなさいよ。いつもは耳の遠い大型犬みたいに鈍感なくせに。
In fact, it was Aoko who was oblivious for once. For his part, Sojiro could not figure out why he felt so restless either. Suffice it to say, they were both pretty clueless in this moment.
もしかして内装？この部屋の家具のグレードが今とは違うから不思議がってるのね。ここベッド以外は私の家から持ち込んだものなの。引っ越してから2年経つけどまだ屋敷には馴染んでないでしょ。
Though she misunderstood the real reason for Sojiro's nervousness, Saoko seemed satisfied that she had resolved Sojiro's anxiety for the time being and returned to her studies. She flipped through her notes and textbooks as if fast-forwarding a tape. There were no other openings. There was no other opening for an outsider like him to intrude in her high-speed study session. Repelled by her intensity, he retreated to his table. He was at least sensitive enough to pick up on her desire to be left alone. It was a testament to Sojiro that having his needs utterly ignored was now second nature to him, to the extent that he could now happily go about his business in solitude. 2 hours passed. Then, as the clock neared 11, Aoko's speed and concentration began to slip. Seeing his window of opportunity, Sojiro seized the moment to strike up a conversation.
青崎、ちょっといいかな。
ん？何？
She spoke hesitantly, not bothering to turn to face him. She continued to flip the pages of her textbook out, be it at a slower speed than before.
この3日間、青崎たちの夕食事情を見てきたけど、君たちの食事はいつもああなのか？
そうだけど、おかしい？
Not in the slightest.
そう言われると困るな。ただ学校じゃみんな楽しそうだった。誰かと食事をとるってことは ああいう風になることだって思ってた。だから、
もしかしないわよ。別にあんたのせいでアリスと話さないわけじゃないわ。私たちはいつもああだから。
Alco spoke calmly, Alco spoke calmly with her back still turned, seemingly unaware of what he was getting at.
張り詰めた食卓だな。青崎とアリスは仲がいいと思ってたのに。
She neither confirmed nor denied his statement. She was, however, surprised by the disappointed tone in which he had made it.
張り詰めた食卓っていうのは合ってるわね。アリスが何回あんたの飲み物にメスカリンを入れてたかなんてもう覚えてないし。昨日なんか、ほんと。あの子何考えてるんだろう。
Wait, what? Hang on. Rowan. Plant. Thin Scottish folklore believe that on a rowan tree would only bring bad luck. Wait. Okay, so apparently if you insert rowan berries into food, they are toxic they are toxic if not cooked, and mescaline, what's... Wait! She was putting peyote... She was trying to put peyote... She was she was putting a hallucinogen in his drink. A bitter smile spread across her face in reminiscence, the pages of her textbook continuing to turn.
メスカリン？
サボテンから取れるアルカロイドよ。
Yep.
アリスが使う以上、ただの幻覚剤じゃないでしょうけどね。と、私はこんなもんでいっか。
She was trying to With that, she slammed shut her fourth textbook of the night. After having scarcely changed position the whole night, she finally turned in her chair to face him.
さあ、今度はあんたを仕込まなくちゃね。
She was trying to... Alice was trying to drug him with a hallucinogen. Witches are insane.
今日の4科目の答案。実に総重郎らしい出来栄えでそっとしそうになったわ、私。
Actually, how bad were his scores? Her tone was light, but her gaze was heavy as she stared at Sojiro, seated across the
原告、地理、数学、電子工学。あの調子であと2日続けたら、冬休みが消えるのは当然でしょうね。
いや、俺も困るぞ。休みなのに学校に行くのはなんか気が乗らない。
Sojiro calmly corrected her.
そりゃあ私のセリフだ。あんたが学校に行くってことは必然こっちまでとばっちりが来るっての。
All she could think about, as much as she tried not to, was Mr. Yamashiro and his annoying friend.
それ以前に私の目が黒いうちはオール赤なんてやつは許さない。本来なら少年から叩き直すところだけど、ま、あんたはいろいろ事情があるからとりあえず点数だけで勘弁してあげる。私もテストは一夜漬けで片付ける方だから、あんた一人仕込むのにそう時間はかからないだろうし。
Sojiro's expression openly soured in response to her declaration. It was obvious he did not think he needed her meddling in his studies.
あんたね、苦労するのは私とあなた、どっちだと思う？
Sojiro got the feeling that it would be him, but he nodded slowly nonetheless. Then again, it would probably take more time. Then again, it would probably take more effort on her part than on his, and in any case, he knew there was no way to talk her out of it.
この度はご迷惑をおかけします。
Sojiro merrily bowed his head to show gratitude and willingness to work.
よろし、安心なさい。私だって鬼じゃないから。 別に平均点狙うってわけでもなし。予定通りこなしていけば3時には眠れるわよ。
So given that this is at 11 o'clock, 4 hours of intensive study. She nodded with satisfaction, pleased by his studious attitude. He had plenty of obstacles ahead of him, but that sense of humility might be enough to see him through.
って何仏心出してるんだ私。いいしずきくん。この後頼られちゃたまんないから釘刺しておくけど、私がマンツーマンで誰かを仕込むなんてことめったにないから。これはあくまで異例中の異例だって覚えておいてね。
She spoke more to convince herself than him, but his expression still darkened. It made one want to hang a sign around his neck that read, "Please take me home," like an abandoned pet. Aoko chided herself for being so soft. For some reason, in that moment, she recalled that it had only been raining the day they met each other. Time passed like the falling grains of an hourglass. Oh my gosh. Aoko squinted as light poured through the window, and she downed another cup of tea. She had lost count of exactly how many she had drank long ago.
一晩かかったね、大崎。
Oh my god. He looks perfectly fine, and she looks like she's on death's door. Sojiro picked up on what she had left unspoken. Aoko had used up all her pep in staying up all night, but also in shouting at him. He looked pale and uncomfortable, just as he had all night long.
甘く見てたわ、あんたのことを。
だから褒めても何も出ないって。
ある意味褒めるに値するかもね。
She was at the end of her rope, but she could not help the bit of pride that swelled up in her. His lack of even the most basic comprehension was shocking, even taking into account his upbringing in the wilderness. His ability was that of a middle school student, and that was being generous. I mean, to be fair, this is almost certainly in line with his upbringing. I mean, the guy was in an isolated mountain town, so it shouldn't be surprised that he's having trouble immediately jumping into a proper grade level, especially since he apparently had only been, he had more or less just jumped in near the end of a semester. Preparing him for exams by teaching him new concepts and ideas was a waste of time. Rote memorization was his only hope for passing. Everything he memorized could collapse like a house of cards afterwards, for all she cared, so long as he remembered for his exams. Assuming he had the capacity to be a good student in the first place, and her mistake. It took all night to cover the content for just 4 exams, and she still did not feel confident he could apply what he so earnestly tried to memorize.
でもね、真面目なのはいいことだけど、あんた暗記するのに時間か。
そこは多めに見てほしい。今まで頭より体で覚えることのが多かったんだ。
Aoko let out an exasperated sigh. Naturally, physical prowess mattered more in mountain life than the intellectual kind, but still.
まあいいわ。これで山城からあんたの成績について相談されることもないでしょうし。紅茶、もう一杯。
Sojiro stood up and obeyed as Aoko stretched her aching back. She had apparently bought the tea bags in bulk, so there were still plenty of use.
まったく無駄遣いだな。
He spoke under his breath, so she wouldn't hear. It made him somehow happy to see her so tired and unfocused after the grueling all-night lesson she had given him. It did not cross his mind that the excess tea bags, far from being an indulgent purchase, were purchased intentionally to sustain him through the night. A relaxed expression came across Aoko's face as she watched him, naive and peaceful as could be.
悪くないけど、せめてリーフティーで入れられるように仕込まなくちゃダメかな。
Seeming to have overheard her not-so-inner monologue, Sojiro made the face.
やっぱり味は違うのか？
違う。正直私はどうでもいいんだけど、アリスはね、かなりお茶にはうるさいよ。そうだ、宗十郎、 アリスとうまくいってる？
Alko cheerfully slumped over the table, now covered with textbooks and scribbled notes. Sotro watched her with a hint of resentment in his eyes.
彼女と会えるのは食事の時だけで、食事と言ったらあれだろ？
そう？私は十分脈ありだと思ったけど。そっちはアリスを怖がってないし、アリスはそっちを追い出す理由を見つけようと躍起になってるし。いい条件よ、これって。
全然わからないな。あの子とこっちの関係は遊園地前の青崎と俺の関係と同じじゃないか。
とりあえず反目し合ってはいないでしょ。一方通行の関係だけど、それはそれ。アリスにしちゃ上出来っていうか、理由を探している時点で可能性ありってね。あの子は反感に応えることが癖になっちゃってるから、大抵相手を自滅させちゃうのよ。
Her ominous words only confused Sotro
知って
further.
しまえば単純な話なんだけどね、あの子の場合。知ってしまえば単純な話なんだけどね。ただ
Whether or not he could put it into practice was another story altogether.
難しいよ、青崎は。
He carried their teacups back to the table as he spoke. Alko picked hers up and took a sip to dispel her exhaustion.
でも、俺はまだあの子の顔しか知らない。クオンジ・アリスという名前すら定かじゃないのは。
He followed Alko's lead and took a sip of his own. His cup contained not tea but plain hot water.
あの子のこと教えてほしい？
Alko scrutinized him carefully as she sat. Most boys would have been captivated by her gaze in that moment.
いや、そういうことは本人に聞いてあげるべきだと思う。
But he ignored her and stared straight ahead as if speaking directly to Alice herself.
そうね。ほんと、あんたってアリス好みの対応をするわ。ねえ、前から気になってたけど、客室でアリスに何を言ったの？いくら私との約束とはいえ、あの子が部外者を半日も放置するなんてありえないのよ。
He thought back to that moment. He could recall only 2 or 3 words he had exchanged with Alice after awakening in the guest room. He did not recall the conversation being anything special, but he could not bring himself to casually share it without her now. After all.
ねえ、どんなセリフであの子の
Alko eagerly pressed him for answers. Sojiro frowned, unsure of what to say. He did not know what the interaction had been like for Alice, but for him it felt special, sacred almost. The question was, why and for whom was he so concerned?
ほら、白状しなさいってば。隠し事なんて似合わないわよ。
Her disconcerting smile moved even closer. Sojiro did not look like he was able to stay silent much longer. As he would eventually come to realize, Alko Ozaki had a sometimes troubling propensity to gossip.
まあ、あの子と今の青崎に比べれば花もロマンもなかったのだけは確かかな。さっきまでは青崎が鬼みたいだったからいいもんだなって気がつかなかった。
He stared directly into her eyes as he spoke. Alko nearly leapt out of her seat in panic. Now that he pointed out, she realized their bodies were practically touching.
仕方ないでしょ。この方が効率良かったんだから。あんた、横にいないとすぐ間違えるし。
Alko stood up as she lashed back at him.
そうだね。なんか昔みたいで久しぶりに集中できた。これが異例中の異例っていうのが本当に残念だ。
余裕あるじゃない。その分じゃ今日のテストだけじゃなく、アリスとの話し合いもうまくいきそうね、宗十郎。
あ、それはもちろん。
His cool response caught her off guard, and for a moment she was at a loss for words. She meant it sarcastically, and yet he responded with a warm smile.
方針変更だ。まずは近くで話しかけてみるよ。嫌なことはいずれ終わるって分かったから。
This will either end very well or very poorly. Alko remained in a state of silent shock as he spoke and rose to his feet. She could not help but feel a reluctant respect for what seemed to be his newfound confidence and competence.
とりあえず今日は一人で帰ってアリスと話してみる。青崎は放課後生徒会だろ。
He was right. It was their last meeting before winter break. Normally, he would have waited until the meeting ended or else gone straight to his part-time job. This was part of Alco's plan to make sure he and Alice would never learn the mansion together.
まさかあんた一人でアリスとやり合うつもりなの？
別にやり合うつもりはないぞ。し合っても勝てないだろう、アリスには。
His reply made complete... You make it sound like we're going to get in a fight. I wouldn't stand a chance. You know that. His reply made complete sense, which floored her.
でも、青崎がいたら話が複雑になるのは目に見えてるんだ。そんなわけで、今日はゆっくり飛び丸の相手でもしててくれ。
本気？
He felt like he was being tested, but nodded nonchalantly nonetheless. Knowing how grave the situation really was, Alco was not sure how to respond to his apparent lack of concern. The morning light coming through the window marked a stark contrast between the two. Which stood faith and light, which looked in darkness. That went without saying. The silence lasted for only a brief moment. Staring at him gravely, she said,
なら止めはしないわ。
That was all she had. Her dry tone hid the significance of their pregnant silence, not revealing the slightest sign of discord.
なんか怒ってないか、青崎。
別に。それで何か考えはあるの
？Sotro furrowed his brow in deep thought. He knew it would be hard to get close to her through talk alone. In fact, it felt nearly impossible. Kinomi had been the voice of wisdom and folly for him countless times in the past. Incidentally, Kinomi had been referring to Alco at the time he shared that pearl of wisdom. But Sotro had this distinct impression that trying to buy Aozaki's kindness with gifts would not end well.
だいたいアリスの趣味もわからないじゃないか。考えてみると、今の自分と彼女はまるで接点がない。
You could say that again. Sotro crossed his arms at a loss.
いつものことだけど、何も考えてなかったわけね。
うん。でもまあ、あれこれ考えなくてもいいと思う。アリスにはあれこれ説明するとか、分かってもらおうとか、そういうんじゃなくて、なんていうか。
He pondered intently as he tried to put his vague thoughts into something concrete, but he did not spend much time in thought. With a nod, he
要は、
concluded.
俺が彼女を好きかどうかってことじゃないか?
He articulated that which is often so hard to say with surprising clarity and calm. It was certainly a prerequisite for the task he hoped to achieve. He had no hope of making her appreciate him with words, or with acts of giving with the expectation of reciprocation. He simply wished to get to know her better because he liked her. That was his honest, uncontrived intention, and it reflected the purity of his heart. But whether that was in his best interest or not was another story altogether. Calculation, compromise, selfishness, and conflict. Purity such as his often irritated people who believed that morals went against human nature. Or, rather, people who were inevitably forced to believe it. Alco silently walked away without responding to what Sotro said. Her long hair swung from side to side as she passed him.
Ozaki?
Noting her strangely cold manner, he called out to her. However, she was already opening the door to leave.
下でシャワー浴びてくるから、あなたは自分の部屋に戻ってて。
Her words lacked any expressive inflection. In his confusion, all Sotro could do was nod.
いいけど。
Emotion returned to her face as he spoke. Yet it was not the typical irritated look to which he had grown so accustomed.
そうね。あんた流に言えば、多分私は怒ってる。何に対してのものかは、あんまり言いたくないけど。
Poor Sotro did not even realize that he himself was the reason. She looked at him for an instant. He witnessed an emotion on her face of which he had never seen the likes of before.
じゃあね。これが最後になるかもしれないから、お別れぐらいは言っておくわ。あなたはアリスを甘く見すぎてる。でも、それが同時にあんたの強みなのよね。私たちには毒にしかならないけれど。
The door slammed loudly shut behind. Grammar. Her steps were audible as she walked away on the other side of the wall. The corridor must have been nearly freezing without any central heating, but Alco seemed perfectly comfortable.
って、なんで私から出ていくんだ？順番が逆。 普通先に出てくのはそっちじゃない。
Alko promptly kicked Sojiro out of her room. Once again, the wooden door closed with a slam. The corridor was not as cold as he had expected. Not quite as bad as a freezer, at least. The second day of exams ended, and Sojiro was on his way back to the mansion. The road grew steeper and the woods thicker as he made his way up the familiar slope. People in town called it not a hill but a mountain, simply because it took over 20 minutes to climb. This did not sit well with Sojiro, for whom a mountain was something that could not be overcome so easily. The road was paved, for one thing, and the canopy overhead let in plenty of sunlight to cut the way. None of the inclines were especially steep, and no animals lurked in the underbrush. There was no chance of losing his way, no reason to worry about getting lost. Sojiro quietly reprimanded himself for getting so wrapped up in his own little world. In the past few weeks since moving here, he had been constantly comparing the town with his former mountain home. Normally, he would not get upset over it, but in recent days since meeting Alko, as it happened, he had become rather hung up on the differences. The reasons for this eluded him, but he knew that Alko was a force that could not be stopped. This naturally made him want to quicken his own pace. The mansion where they both lived was the antipathy of her lively personality. It stood out like a sore thumb even in a town like Misaki. Some people said it was haunted. There were no ghosts per se, but it was inhabited by magicians, so their claims were closer to the truth than they could have possibly known.
そういえば、幽霊と魔法使いっていうのはどっちが常識外れなんだろう。
Lost in contemplation as he was, the boy failed to notice how his own lack of familiarity with city life played into the equation. In any case, none of his pondering changed what needed to be done. Tomorrow was the last day of exams. That meant he only had a little longer until Alko stopped taking responsibility for his safety. If possible, today was going to be the day when the mansion's owner accepted his continued residence here. Sojiro slipped between the trees encircling the mansion and walked down the naturally tree-lined avenue that led him to the front door.
よし。
Taking a deep breath, he stepped across the threshold. The drawing room was where he expected to find Alice. However, he found himself face to face with a most unexpected scene. A few steps in, he arrived at the large foyer extending from the mansion's entrance. But one thing was clearly out of place. The foyer of the mansion was like a hall in a medieval castle. It was illuminated by the cold winter sun casting down through the skylight, unaided by artificial light. The wooden tiles smelled of the outdoors. And there was Alice, dressed in all black, huddled against a column so enormous it resembled a sharply rounded tree trunk. The mansion was quite literally supporting her frail body. Like a mother's lullaby or a gently rocking cradle. The heavy atmosphere within this old building suppressed even the slightest stir, almost as if warding away any disturbance to her slumber. There she slept in the shadows of home. Hidden away from outsiders, her sleeping figure was enough to mesmerize anyone who laid eyes upon her. Sojiro instinctively looked up at the ceiling out of sheer awkwardness. He wanted to surprise her, but not in this way. Her slender frame lay asleep by the fireplace. The scene was as beautiful as a painting, yet hard on his heart at the same time. Her slumber seemed breathless. She was too still, not even a hint of movement. And yet, slumped against that frigid column under the cold winter sky, happiness appeared to be her blanket. A passerby would not be blamed for thinking she was in that most peaceful state of eternal slumber. Death. Sojiro spoke to himself as he gazed idly upon her. Bringing her a blanket or something warm did not so much as cross the boy's mind. Instead, odd as it sounds, the first thing he thought to do was to go prepare some tea. He made sure to be as quiet as possible as he opened the drawing room door. On the table, waiting for him, were 3 pills. They were the medicine Alco required him to take every day when he arrived home. Gulping down the vaguely sweet pills and continuing on to the kitchen, he selected a box of tea from among the many in the cabinet brewed enough for 2 people. Alice was still asleep when he returned to the foyer. Careful not to make any noise, he crouched close to the ground. He was startled by how cold the ground felt through his pants. He thought it would be warmer here by the fireplace, but then again, he recalled how Alco had referred to it as a useless hole in the wall. What was likely the case was that neither she nor Alice knew how to use it properly. After taking the teacups from the tray and placing one in front of each of them, Sojiro carefully pulled the textbook on classical literature from his satchel. He could still see her angry face from this morning. The reason for her anger was still as much a mystery as the unusual look he saw briefly come across her face. In any case, one thing was certain. He needed to start studying for tomorrow. Sorry, I needed to drink something. Thanks to Alco's instructions, today's exams went well enough, but tomorrow's would be an even more formidable challenge. After how angry she was this morning, he could not expect her to help him again tonight. He complained under his breath as he cracked open his textbook. Apparently, he intended to spend his time in this fashion until Alice finally awoke. The sound of the pages turning was the only audible noise in the grand hall. There was no ticking of clocks or rustling of leaves to disturb her sleep. After a few hours, Sojiro quietly rose to his feet. The light that filled the foyer was beginning to turn from white to red. Time to go to work. He glanced again at Alice as he stretched his stiff back. She slept in perfect stillness, just as she had this entire time. Sojiro arched his eyebrow in speculation. He had no idea what her normal sleeping schedule was like, so he had no idea as to whether he should wait. As he reached the end of a long train of thought, Sojiro gave a quick nod of his head and took his leave of the mansion. Today, work was the shift at the Chinese restaurant in Misaki's shopping district, the Mad Bear. Their uniforms had been made by someone with an obvious preference for garish colors. The orange apron was emblazoned with a cartoon polar bear slashing a walking tube with its powerful claws. The design resembled warning signs about wild animals seen in the mountains and stood out Misaki for its one-of-a-kind originality. This was the Chinese restaurant, the Mad Bear. Aside from its name and logo, the restaurant was the type of cheap, hole-in-the-wall dive that could be found anywhere. It faced competition from the ever-increasing number of chain restaurants, so it managed to last longer than other dining spots, having received rave reviews on a regular basis. The Mad Bear prioritized the personal touch, focusing on its local clientele, and thus made a point to offer home delivery. It earned the affectionate moniker QKS, the Quick Killer Stop. Making these deliveries was Sojo's responsibility for the time being. Places in Misaki within cycling distance fell under his domain. Anything beyond that was handled by a more experienced staff member on the legendary 50cc King Salmon motorbike. But anyway. When delivery workers were not out on deliveries, they spent their shift bussing tables or washing dishes. The dinner rush was yet to come, and Sojo and his fellow delivery boys were shooting the breeze while washing dishes in the back. The two were elbow deep in a giant sink as they enthusiastically scrubbed. At least that was what they pretended to do while they gossiped.
和食のケニアだけじゃねえんだってよ。三崎町の大帝都にもメシアンにもその手の注文があったらしいぜ。そんなに肉が欲しいなら下市に行けばいいのにな。なんだって生肉だの大物の鮭丸ごとだのを出前させやがるのか。どうよ。こう露骨にヤバそうな話じゃね？ワニとかアザラシでも飼ってるんじゃねえかな、そいつ。
他に比べてみると確かに珍しい話だと思う。ところで木の実、ワニってなんだ？
ワニはワニだろう。だっせ、実物見たことないのかよ。まあ俺もねえけどな。
Alligator's tasty. it tastes when it's fried. It tastes faintly of chicken.
今度ガクガク動物ランドのアフリカ特集ビデオを貸してやるから見とけよ。
They might have alligators. I don't think alligators I'm pretty sure are North American. I'm pretty sure crocodiles. Yeah, I'm pretty sure crocodiles are. Hang on. Yeah, no. There are no alligators in Africa. It's only crocodiles. Now, the two do look similar because they're in the same, because they are both crocodilians. But no, it is in fact alligators are North American. This was a familiar pattern of conversation between the two, especially now Kinomi was used to Sojo's lack of general knowledge. Their banter was interrupted by the delivery phone. The manager snapped up the receiver and quickly jotted down the order address. Once he hung up, everyone in the kitchen did their best to avoid making eye contact with him. Nobody wanted to go rushing out for a delivery on such a cold day. The manager singled Sojo out for the task, seemingly unfazed by his staff's laziness. The manager tore the sheet with the order and address ran nodded from his memo pad. Sojo took one look at it before a grimace quietly spread across his face. It's to the Manor, isn't it? The manager stared right back at him as if he could tell what it was he wanted to say. Sojo stared in admiration as the manager, dressed in black, marched out of the kitchen in his all-business way. Nowhere was free from the odd occurrence now and then. It was after 10 at night. Sojo had taken a small detour on his way home from work and now faced an outraged Aoko, as expected. Seeing her so visibly irritated made him feel a rush of relief. Did not know why she was angry, but he could tell it was a different type of anger than what he saw earlier that morning. He set down the cardboard box he'd been carrying in his arms and glanced toward the fireplace. The sleeping girl was there no more.
違うわ。もう10時になったの間違い。あんたってほんと自分がどんな状態にあるか分かってないのね。いいから今に来て。
She walked briskly to the other room without pausing, leaving Sojiro standing in confusion, head tilted to one side. He proceeded to pick his box back up and follow after her eagerly. He removed his coat and hung it on a hanger as he entered the living room. Apparently, today was one of those days where Alice kept herself locked away in her room. On the table were the familiar pills. Alco handed over the pills and a glass of water with an expectant look on her face.
薬なら出かける前に飲んだけど。
は？なんだって私たちがあんたの健康を気にかけなくちゃいけないのよ。勘違いしてるようだけど、あんたが即効性じゃないから、効き目は半日すると出てくるんだけど。アリスのやつ、これぐらいしないと信用できないって言い張ったのよ。ほら、分かったらさっさと飲む。ま、私もこれ面倒だと思うし。
Wait, what? Okay. So the first pill is the first 3 pills, the first set of pills are poison. And the second
近いう
set
ち
are
もっと形のある
antidotes.
方法を考えてみるから、それまでこの方法で我慢して。
I mean, at least Alco's trying to find a way around it.
言ってることは尻滅裂だが。
Sotro took the pills from her and gulped it down. The fact that it was poison gave him no pause at all. And as for his roommate's tyrannical behavior, he showed no signs of standing up to it.
まったく。毒を。
Sotro's face relaxed into a smile upon finding the funny side of the situation. Alco was utterly dumbfounded as to how he could be happy at a time like this.
今日帰りが遅れたのは、アパートまで荷物を取りに行っていたからなんだ。そういうことなら、
荷物って。
Sotro nodded emphatically as he pointed incredulously at the cardboard box in his hands.
住んでいないのに家賃を払うのはバカらしいから、今日で引き上げてきた。一応、いつでも戻れるように話はつけてあるから、3ヶ月ぐらいは大丈夫だよ。
家賃？あ、そっか。私ってばなんでそんなことを忘れてたんだろう。アリスが聞いたらよ。
A smile blossomed across her face, as they say. It was an open, bold-faced look of a child who just came up with a mischievous plan. Sotro shook with fear at the thought of what that smile might bring next.
けどずいぶん少ないのね、荷物。段ボール1箱分しかないの？
そうかな。
ちょっと前に戻ったわ。珍しく食後もここに残ってたんだけど、待ちきれなかった。
She gave Sotro a meaningful look while continuing to smile that sinister smile.
待ちきれなかったって何を？
そりゃあ、アリスが眠ってるのをいいことに、在庫のないフォションとブルーキャリコを勝手に使ってくれたどこかの誰かさんにお仕置きするためなんじゃない？
フォションって。
そう、私もびっくりしたけどね。アリスがどっかで寝入るのはよくあることだけど、紅茶を用意して眠るなんてのは初めてだったから、どんな心境の変化か知りたくて起こしたら。
Sotro clapped his hands together as if remembering something important. He had forgotten to clean up the tea before leaving. The regret written from forehead to chin delighted Alco immensely.
そうか。それじゃあ。
当然、コマドリが飛ば。
ああ、俺でも怒る。片付けをきちんとしないなんて。
Sotro harshly scolded himself for his failure.
論点違う。あのね、寝顔を間近で見られたから怒ってるのよ、アリスは。
え？そうかな。アリスはそういうのは気にしないと思うんだけど。
あんたはそうかもしれないけど、私たちは気にするの。
Alco's glare. Okay, yeah, fair enough. That is a lot of the things they get mad over are kind of stupid, but that is perfectly. It is perfectly justifiable to get mad that someone is literally just watching you sleep. Alco's glare was enough to make glass shatter. There was an indescribable intensity in the way she said that.
それは青崎たち限定の話か。
世間一般での常識よ。自分が気にしないからって他人もそうだと思ってると、いつかやけど。
でもそれだったらロビーで寝ているアリスにだって問題ないか？
その心意気は立派だけど、そこはそれ。この館の持ち主は彼女だから。この洋館内であなたが出会ったあらゆる不義不始末。この意味、わかる？
Alco's question sent Sotro into a trance of deep thought until finally he uttered.
つまり、ここは。
はい、よくできました。正確には私とアリスのだけどね。領主は何をやっても許されるってことよ。
She smiled as she spoke and plopped herself down on the sofa, Sojiro remained standing behind the sofa opposite hers. He ran over the conversation again and again in his head. The notion of this being their kingdom made him realize that he actually had no idea where the girls had come from or their family's backgrounds.
青崎、君、ご両親はどうしてるんだ？
He inadvertently blurted out, this being the question foremost on his mind.
生きてるわよ。三崎町から下りに4駅行った東川ってところの地主。死は祖父だけど、今は隠居して両親と一緒の土地に住んでるわ。
そう聞くと、なん
Sojiro had imagined something more outrageous for a family of
両親は
magicians.
ね。父さんにはあんまり魔術回路は作られなかったみたいだから。その分、私には2世代分の潜在能力があるって祖父は言ってるけど、どうだか。宗十郎の期待してるような一族は、どっちかっていうとアリスの方よ。
Alco offered nothing more, as if to suggest that was as far as she was willing to reveal for now. Sojiro insisted on talking to Alice directly rather than hearing things secondhand, so chose not to go back on his word by pushing the topic further.
詳しくは本人から聞きなさい。アリスの紅茶好きもそこから来てるんだし。
Those Brits and their tea.
そういえば、なんで今日に限ってリーフティーなんか入れたの？ティーバッグを使った方がまだマシだったでしょうに。
青崎がそっちの方がいいって言ったじゃないか。アリスは紅茶にうるさいって。
Alco was momentarily at a loss for words. He seemed so oblivious most of the time, but apparently he was attentive to some details, at least selectively.
ま、いいわ。年明けの行事があるんだけど、その場しのぎで行った餅つき大会が通っちゃってさ。
Sojiro nodded in acceptance. In fact, he had already been planning to do so before
そ
she
れ
even
はいい
asked.
けど、体は大丈夫か、青崎。昨日から寝てないだろ
夕方に3時間ちょい仮眠を取ったから調子はいいわ。そういうあんたこそ体は持つんでしょうね。
She meant the all-night cramming session, of course. Needless to say, Sojiro was more than likely to struggle given that he too had not slept a wink. All he could do was give a relieved smile. He thought back to the days just after he transferred here when she watched his every move. From the sidelines, it showed a startling amount of concern for
う。
him.
いいよ。どのみち苦労するのは青崎の方だし、異例中の異例は。
His cheery response grated on her just a little.
あんた、くだらないことだけはしつこく覚えてるんだから。
She heaved her shoulders in exasperation and dropped her head as an excuse to look away from the beaming smile on his face. The following day, the last day of finals had ended without a hitch. That final December hurdle was finally a thing of the past. For all but one student, that is. For Sojiro, the greatest challenge was yet to come. He bid farewell to his classmates, all jittery with excitement for the last day of term, and headed into the Shiro Inozuka woods. The road home was no different than yesterday, like he was reliving yet another day striding up that hill. Yet today there was a fierce determination in his steps. Today was his last chance, and he wanted nothing more than to talk to the girl. He did not care if she was cruel to him or ignored him, nor whether Alco was being truthful when she said that she could trap him in a mirror land or something like that. All he really cared about was having the chance to speak with her face to face. But nothing is ever that simple. To tell the truth, what he found upon finally entering the mansion was not wholly unexpected.
よく寝る子だな、本当。
The deja vu he was experiencing made him dizzy. Faced with an exact reenactment of the previous day, he could not help but blurt out what he was thinking. Alice was sleeping by the fireplace, just as she had done yesterday. The way her legs draped to one side resembled those of a princess in a children's book. She looked more comfortable than she had the day before. Miraculously, he had a rare flash of insight that enabled him to read the situation more
学校で
clearly.
飛び丸は一人何をしているんだろう。
Upon glancing back at the entrance, he made his decision, took a deep breath, and rolled up his sleeves. If today was a reenactment of yesterday, then he supposed he would play along with that idea. Sojiro removed his shoes and headed for the kitchen. He was off to prepare another ill-fated pot of tea. Since she was angry about him using her precious falchion, this time he turned to Jackson's fruit nerve brew. Sadly, this was about as much as Sojiro could manage to amend his behavior. He had failed to realize that it was not the brand of tea that had landed him in hot water, but rather his incorrect brewing method. After filling the pot with tea, he carried it back to the foyer. His breath was visible in the cold air as he sat himself down by the fireplace. Sojiro took a sip of the fruity tea he prepared for himself and pulled his textbooks from his bag. Exams were over now, but he had been instructed to take extra classes for the subjects from day one of school. Quite inevitable. The foyer was warmer than outside, but still far from comfortable. It was enough to make anyone yearn for some source of warmth. Sojiro dove into his electronics textbook in the winter-chilled hall. The class was not very popular, which is why it had been recommended to him in the first place. That fact that everyone who took it started on equal footing made it more appealing to him than other classes. He downed the rest of the tea, having no appreciation for its flavor, and refilled his cup. The tea was still warm, since the ceramic teapot had excellent heat retention. He vaguely recalled their conversation as his eyes advanced across the page. The lack of lighting in the foyer was forcing him to rely on illumination from the skylight. The light cut into the room at a diagonal angle in such a way as to divide the foyer into light and dark areas, with the fireplace in the shadow. The room resembled ancient ruins covered in ash, or perhaps the quiet, forgotten world of a faded fairy tale. Time slipped on by within the white walls of this room, hidden away from the sun. The minutes passed slowly for some time until the sound of a textbook slamming shut brought the room back to reality. Sojiro stretched his stiff back and he got started on cleaning up. He put his textbook back in his bag, placed his cup on the tray, leaving Alice sitting in front of her on the floor. He said unceremonious. He spoke as if to convince himself that he had no other choices. He prepared to leave the sleeping foyer behind. But before he could, a sound behind him stopped him in his tracks. He turned around with his back under his arm and tray in his hands, so as not to cause even a ripple in her teacup. He greeted her.
Yeah.
In a light, easygoing manner. She remained seated next to the fireplace like a black-eyed sleeping beauty. Her face was as still as a statue, almost no different than it had been in slumber. Looking at Alice now, he realized just how different she and Alko really were. Alko communicated her feelings openly, even if he could never quite tell where they came from. Her trademark expression of irritation would keep him guessing as to the reason she was angry, but to her credit, her emotional state was always clear. Alice, on the other hand, was completely unreadable. She might be angry, or then again sad. He could not tell either way. Her question gave him a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. He could not decide whether it was animosity or perplexity that he heard in her voice. If the former, this was likely turned into a replay of their interaction from the other night. An image of the shattered bottle sprang to his mind. Sojiro knew his response would be extremely important, and after struggling for a few moments, he finally worked up the courage to say something. Just not the correct thing, unfortunately. He had no idea what the correct approach would be, so he simply did whatever came into his mind instead. She gave him no response. Her face said that she detested his presence, but he plodded ahead regardless. Sojiro took his seat and set down the tray once more. Their eyes met. Her inscrutable gaze was enough to turn most people away, but the target of her animosity appeared not to notice it at all.
Ah. 遅くなったけど、こうして話がしたかったんだ、アリスと。
Despite having suggested that it would take time to explain, he managed to sum things up succinctly.
私と会うことではなく。
ん？そうだね。青崎とはもっと話したいところだ。
Alice found herself out of kilter, unable to read his true intentions. Sojiro continued on, failing to notice her bewilderment.
青崎は普段からアリスとは会話がないって言うんだ。それが俺のせいなら困るし、俺のせいじゃないならもっと困る。せっかく同じ場所にいるのに会話がないなんて、もったいないと思うんだ。
Each word he spoke was heavy with emotion. Alice remained utterly unable to discern this boy's intentions. All she could parse was that there was something he wanted from her. But what could that be? What she found even stranger was that he was not speaking to her from a place of fear.
あなたは私が怖くないの？
ああ、だってそう言えるほど俺は君をよく知らない。
Her gleaming eyes looked like they were made of polished quartz. His response had not been what she expected. He spoke with pure honesty and unfettered truth. Such boldness, however, did not actually upset her. Their conversation ground to a halt. If you could even call it a conversation in the first place. Alice grew tense, as if displeased by the strangely comfortable moment of silence between them. Sojiro endured her cold stare, showing no sign of flinching.
話。私と話をしたいと言ったでしょ。なら、好きにしてみたら。
It was more a challenge than an invitation. He had neither a topic on hand nor were they intimate enough to strike up a casual conversation. Nonetheless, her challenge hanged in the air, waiting for a response.
じゃあ、あの鳥の話を。ほら、そこにいる青い鳥。たまに見かけるんだけど、君の飼い鳥か？それとも、ほら、なんて言ったかな。プロイだっけ？あの鳥もアリスの使い魔？
Her eyes let slip for a moment, a very natural response. It was annoyance, such as that which one might feel toward a troublemaker.
あれもプロイだけど、私とは何の関係もないダッチョウ。ずいぶん古くからいるだけで、私もよく知らないわ。
ん？じゃあ勝手に住んでるのか？この家に。
勝手になんて、私が許すはずがないでしょ。ロビンは本当に役に立たないけど、あんなのでも母から譲り受けたものだから。
そっか、安心した。ここに住むの役に立たなきゃダメってわけでもないんだね。
She turned away in silence to avoid looking at his hapless grin. Thus began Sojiro's very lengthy monologue. It started with his part-time job, then moved on to school, next came the amusement park and random gossip around town, and last, the subject of rent. He spent all of 20 minutes on mindless small talk. Then he ran out of things to say, and finally stopped.
ごめん、アルバイトがあるから、もう行くよ。
And that was that. After finally getting his long-awaited chance to talk to her, he realized he had no exit plan in place. So he returned the tray to the kitchen and placed his bag in the foyer, and headed for the door. She had never seen the boy so candid, which was why, overcome with surprise, she found herself calling out to him.
待って。
She had no reason to do so, and yet she called out anyway.
何？
その、今日はポットがあったけど。
うん。昨日の反省点だったから、結局使ったのは自分だけだけど。
そう。そのポットはコーヒーとの兼用だから、ハーブティーには合わないわ。
Sojiro's eyes grew wide with shock. Now he remembered that there had been all sorts of cups and teapots in the cupboard. Each one specially designed for a very different type of tea.
なかなかに奥深い。あれかな。慣れないことはするもんじゃないってことか。
She let out a vexed sigh.
どうして私を起こさなかったの？
Either she had not heard what he said, or she had been waiting this whole time for a chance to ask him that. In any case, her question abruptly interrupted his stream of thought. He fell silent with introspection. The thought of waking her had not so much as crossed his mind either that day or the previous one.
言って、起こす気も、起きることも期待していなかったのは。
Her eyes were filled with animosity. Lies were useless against an all-piercing gaze. The setting sun transformed the foyer into a battle of life and death. Lies or deceptive answers would not be permitted. Amidst the palpable tension that filled the room, where any move, wrong or otherwise, was likely to get him killed, he felt pain rather than fear. Alice's voice was icy cold, preemptively rejecting any response he was to give. The boy vaguely imagined a newborn chick that had fallen from the nest, struggling to survive on its own. It gasped, hanging on to a thread of hope, yet detesting where that thread hung.
言わなきゃいけないか。
Alice nodded sharply.
じゃあ言うけど、 別に深い考えがあったわけじゃない。単に寝た子を起こすのは良くないだろ。
冗談は聞いてないわ。
冗談じゃないよ。眠っているのならそのままでいいと思ったんだ。話はしたいけど、それはまた目が覚めた次の機会にするべきだって。
随分と悠長なのね。青子があなたを守るのは今日までだって聞いているけど、私に取り入る機会はこれが最後なのに。それともあれだけ忠告されておいてまだ何も分かっていないの？
He had not. He swore to her, agreed to her terms, and gone as far as to sit face to face with her to get to know her. Surely he thought that was enough to escape death. And she believed as a mage that his naive goodwill and simple-mindedness were all the reason she needed to execute him. Trivial misunderstandings would only make things worse at this point.
そりゃ何もわからないよ。魔術とか魔法とか。とはっきりしているのは、アリスも青崎も言ったことはきっちり守るってことだけだ。
ならどうして？
Her gaze said what she really wanted to ask. She wanted to know why he did not beg for his life. She knew the answer. She saw the look on his face when he turned to leave without so much as trying to wake her. A look of resignation. What on earth had it meant?
どうしてって、そう言われても困る。そうだな。機会が訪れなかったのなら、それはそういうことだと思ったのかもしれない。君の寝顔はそれぐらい、なんていうか、判断に困った。青崎とは違う意味で、簡単には関われないと思ったんだ。
Sojiro struggled to find the right words, but said what he was feeling in the moment anyway. He'd seen a sleeping witch of the wood who clearly needed someone's help, yet sought the help of no one.
でもしずきくんは関わろうとしているのね。その機会は訪れなかったの。
機会はやってきたよ。なんでこっちも今日ぐらいは自分の勝手にして無茶をしたくなったんだ。
しずきくんの言う通りなら私はあなたを拒絶するしかないのに。
まあそこが難しいところなんだけど。
Sojiro glanced at the entrance. He had no reason to, he just felt an urge to do so.
そこを解決したがってるのは俺だけじゃないと思うよ。
He muttered as if speaking to himself, but it was clearly meant for her to hear. Alice knew full well how poorly he understood the situation. All of this was one giant misunderstanding on his part. His tiny gesture of goodwill, pitiful and pure, resembled that of someone reaching out to help a dying kid. For Alice, doing so would be akin to clutching the thorns of a rose. She felt pain in her chest for the first time in quite a while.
けど私はあなたの同居を認めてはい。
She addressed the floor at her feet to avoid showing him how she truly felt. If he had, she would have seen that her face looked just the way Alcos had earlier.
だろうな。それはきっと今は解決できない問題だ。でもそのうち何かの気まぐれであっさり終わるものかもしれない。だからその時までアリスはずっと俺を嫌っていていいんだと思う。
Her gasp of breath was like a response in itself. To suggest she could keep hating him, she had once wished to hear those words so dearly, if only
大体
once.
だぞ。アリスだけじゃなく青崎も同居を認めてない節があるじゃないか。だから認めてもらうなんて意気込み自体が間違いなんだ。となるとあとは我慢してもらうしかない。難しい話だけど一緒にいても邪魔にならないぐらいならその可能性は上がらないか。
Thinking that, of course, it was possible, but if it were that easy, none of this would have been necessary in the first place. Alice nodded in agreement. There was no way he could have planned for things to work out this well, but his plan in fact had worked inadvertently from the moment the conversation began.
例えばあなたが隣にいても眠っていられるぐらいに。
そうだね。例えばの話。
Beaming, Sojiro stood up and left the foyer. Alice did not stop him this time. He had a newfound spring in his step as he headed to work, but something gave him a moment's
実
pause.
際覗き見は趣味が悪いと思う。
He complained aloud to make sure certain someone heard him. Alco was spying on him. No more than 2 minutes had passed since Sotro left the mansion when a long-haired figure came creeping into the foyer. Alco Ozaki had just been outside the entire time, eavesdropping.
帰ってたの。
With a sullen glare, Alice addressed the interloper. Alco was shivering from head to toe after standing in the cold for so long. She deemed gloves an abomination and refused to wear them, except in the most extreme cold. As a result, her slender fingers were pitifully swollen and red. She deemed gloves an abomination. I don't wear gloves much either, but typically that's mostly because every pair of gloves I grab tend to not really keep my hands that warm. And so I just don't bother half the time. She looked strangely elated as she blew on her handsome one. Alice was not fooled at all by Alca's facade, clear from the ill-tempered look she wore.
あなたがここまで過保護とは思わなかったわ。意地？それとも義務？
どっちかっていうと成り行きね。で、どうだったのよ結果は。気に食わなかったら実力行使に出るって言ってたじゃない。
Alice's mood was growing darker and darker the longer she had to look at Alco's cheerful posture. It all went back to their dinner together the previous night. After everything that happened to the foyer, Alice was both more suspicious of and intrigued by Sojo than ever before. She insisted that Alco let him walk home alone the next day. She then used a concoction to fake her slumber and recreate the same scene as the She played him like a fiddle! That portion of her plan went well, but the rest had veered totally off course. It did not help to know her roommate had savored every moment of it from the other side of the wall either. To make matters worse, Alice was frustrated at herself for letting such trivial matters bother her. She stared at the teacup still sitting on the floor. Her pale finger traced its cold rim.
青子の言う通り、害にはならない人ね。あくまで今のところの話だけど。
She forced a tone of indifference in order to hide her irritation with her apprentice. It was in this moment that Sojour's fate was decided.
あら、それだけ？アリスにしては長く話してたのに。
Smug Alco continues to be a menace. Relentless, Alco continued her line of questioning. Alice only stared back icily.
青子、あなた、隠していたわね。
She voiced her displeasure at Alco's behavior in no uncertain terms. Suddenly, the air in the foyer felt cold as ice. They stared at each other, each trying to guess the other's next move.
さすがね。よくそこに気がついたもんだわ。でも、こればかりは譲れないのよ。
Alco widened her stance and glared at Alice.
何もすべて奪うとは言っていないわ。そうね。あなたにも3割ぐらいは回すつもり。
Completely unperturbed by Alco's warlike posturing, a simple look was all Alice needed to keep her roommate in check.
10が3に化けちゃ、ちょっと黙ってらんないわね。
Huh?
高望みは命取りよ、青子。
Alice remained calm and dignified, not moving a muscle. It felt like hours passed as the two stared at each other in silence. Alco was grinding her teeth in frustration. Well, at this time, their alliance would be in tatters before they even confronted their foe. And worst of all, she knew Alice had the upper hand.
Catch.
Cheapskate. Alco accepted her defeat with a
悔しいけど、アリスが6。私が4で手を打つわ。
It pained her to settle for less. Alice nodded in
そう
satisfaction.
ね。家主は私だけど、彼を招いたのは青子だから。その代わ
Wait,
り、
they're charging
家
you
賃の
more?
取り立てはあなたの役割ね。
いいけど。
Oh my god.
ああ、情けない。こんなことなら錬金術でもかじっておくんだった。
そうでもないわ。彼ら、 バブルが弾けて大変だって話よ。
Alice spoke with the confidence of someone with first-hand experience in such matters, yet Alka only nodded absentmindedly in response. Their bitter fight was over how to split the take of Sojiro's rent now that he was officially going to move in. Not the most becoming quarrel for a pair of mages. Forcing a boy to live with him and then demanding he pay rent was beyond extortion. It was truly vicious.
でもそんなセリフが出るってことはアリスもようやく認めたってことね。
Alka was triumphantly satisfied with himself.
認めてはいないけど、公園での夜、彼を結界で捕捉しなかった責任があるから、彼と約束をした青子だけを責められないでしょ。
約束。
At the very least, Alice has decided not to kill him, or decided that she wasn't going to kill him. Alko looked up at the ceiling as she recalled the night at the amusement park. Only a week at most had passed since then, but Alko already felt that Sojiro's fate and her own had become intrinsically linked. Or perhaps they had always been connected by fate since the moment they'd met. She could not see into the future, so there was no way to know for sure.
ま、縁とか運とかはともかく変だけどいいやつよね、あいつ。
The thought uttered to herself in self-confirmation more than to Alice. Alice could only look on in annoyance, perhaps in an attempt to voice her displeasure at her comment.
青子、あの傷を知ってる？
傷？
Alice raised her slender fingers to her mouth as if to push the words back in. She had blurted it out in the heat of the moment, a secret that no one else was supposed to know, but that which one couldn't keep to herself. Alko tilted her head in confusion. Alice looked relieved for some reason. Her sudden antipathy toward Alko had dissipated as well.
幸せな人。
Said Alice as she took a sip of her cold tea. She made no attempt to explain who was fortunate or why. A moment later, her beautiful face contorted in revulsion.
まずい。
She abandoned the cup to the floor once more, her black dress unceremoniously scrunched up as she stood. Just one sip of the underbrewed tea sent her fleeing to the drawing room to remove the bad taste from her mouth. As soon as she was gone, Alko hesitatingly took the teacup in her own hands. It was almost certainly better left untasted, but she could not help but wonder how Sojiro's tea could arouse such a strong response. After one small sip, she returned it quietly to the floor.
だからティーバッグにしろって言ったのに、あのバカ。
Fuck. Yep, he should have used the tea bags like I told him to. The expression on her face was nearly identical to that of her roommates. And yeah. Alright, so our boy Sojiro is going to live another day. Wow, it's almost been a month since I've started doing Witch on the Holy Night. Wait. Okay, yeah, no, I'm not being stupid. I'm not being stupid. It has almost been an actual month. But yeah. I think that's where we're gonna stop for the night. Man, I really wish I could. Well, okay. I'm also probably gonna have a very light week next week. I got some stuff I need. I got a lot of stuff that piled up, but I've got a lot of stuff piled up, and I might only stream once, if at all. But, well, that aside, I do still have one more stream this week for all y'all. And this one is for, well, the new hot game on the market, Helldivers 2. I've been playing that. I've been playing that game a fair bit. I've been playing that one for a fair bit, and oh my lord, it is so much fun. It is really stupidly fun. I mean, it's incredibly difficult, especially when like 5 chargers spawn in on you and you get turned to paste. Or when there's those stupid acid spewing ones. Yeah, we don't talk about the spewers. But anyway, yeah. Friday at 6 o'clock, we're going to be playing Helldivers 2. And yeah, that is. Yeah, I did in fact remember to save. I always have to like triple check to make sure I did, because I get really paranoid sometimes that I forgot to do something basic. But yeah, that's gonna be it for the night. Um, thank you all so much for watching and for supporting my content. If you like it, please subscribe. And I will see you on Friday with Helldivers 2. Take care.